Gonna go ahead and begin. Well, you guys want to learn about assessment, right?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Paul Asunda, and I'm an assistant professor in Purdue Polytechnic Institute. I have 75% in the Purdue Polytechnic and 25% in curriculum and instruction. So kind of like a joint appointment between the two colleges, College of Education and the Polytechnic. Most of you are in engineering, correct? Very good. EPICS stuff? Great. All right, so what I want to do today is talk about assessment in elementary, middle, and high school. Pretty sure my colleagues came out here and talked about the differences between elementary, the structure of elementary, middle school, and high school. Is that correct? Okay, good, good. So let's look at assessment. I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios here, two scenarios. So an open example, you need to design a tent. Okay, so your task is to design a tent like the one in the picture. So you have a pole, and then these two ends should zip together at night. However, the directions are, it must be big enough for two adults to sleep in. And then you're asked to draw a diagram to show how you will cat the tent. So that's scenario number one. Okay, let's look at the other scenario. So tent design, same thing. However, you're sort of like given some constraints and conditions that you need to, can you read that? You can't? Okay. So scenario number two, you're given some constraints. Just look at those two scenarios, whereby the first scenario, it's an open-ended question. You're just told to design a tent. And then the second scenario, you have certain key things that you need to be able to attain or achieve. So if you look at the second design, same thing, but they tell you that you must satisfy some certain conditions. Okay, so for example, it must be big enough for two adults with their baggage. If you recall, the first example was just two adults, and then you're told to design it. Just keep that at the back of your mind, okay? Do you guys recall learning progressions? Did you talk about learning progressions last week? Can somebody remind me what learning progressions is all about?
It's the kind of summaries of what students should know at certain grade levels.
Summaries, so sequential kind of thing. Somebody else, I saw a hand up there. Learning progressions. You're smiling, so you remember?
I mean, basically what he said, but it looks at like grade levels too, or you can look at subject areas and it's like specifics on what the student should know as they move along.
As they move along, right? And in the state of Indiana, we have standards. Talk about standards. Next generation standards, do you remember that? NGSS. And then also each specific area has their own standards. So how many took PLTW classes in high school, if I may ask? Okay, so you had some certain standards that you had to attain, right? So they had goals and objectives, but those goals and objectives were tied back to the state standards, correct? So that you could be able to meet your end of course. I know you probably did not get to do exams for the PLTW stuff with regards to end of course assessment, but however, you still had some standards that you had to meet that the teacher at that point in time had to grade you on, correct? Okay, so if you do recall that, I'd like you to just think about this question. How may you assess products from these two examples? The two examples, the two scenarios, assume elementary versus secondary. So if I were to give elementary kids those two examples that I shared, how might you, and you, sit down and assess the product, the complete product? Does that make sense? How will you end up sitting down and get to say, hey, this is an A, this is a B, well, this is not a, how will you end up doing that? Anybody? Any idea of how you'll end up assessing those two? Yes, sir.
A rubric.
A rubric. What's a rubric? I like that.
A little chart with certain specifications that determine an outcome.
Determine an outcome. Very good. Very. You guys know what a rubric is? Very, very good. I like that. So it's a little chart, as you say. It's kind of like a marking scheme, right? You know, so a grading scheme that helps you to determine the learning outcomes that you want, you as a teacher, you want your students to get to attain. Okay, great. So you can use a rubric. What other things can you use? The many ways of assessing. Yes?
Well, if they're older kids, like for secondary, you can have them actually make it.
Make it. And they can actually document the process. So you can have a notebook, engineering design notebook, you know, in addition to the rubric, right? Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
As they're working in teams, you could have them evaluate each other.
Peer, like CATME, right? You guys know about CATME? So peer evaluation, very good. Teamwork, because it's all about teamwork, right? You could never achieve anything on your own. You got to work in teams, right? Okay, very good, very good. Peer assessment. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
You can use a test.
A test.
Just ask questions.
Exactly, and ask questions based on the concepts that you're going to teach, right? So you can have a test, you know? So we'll talk about Bloom's taxonomy. How many know about Bloom's taxonomy? Yeah! So I'm going to probably rely on you sometimes. Okay, great. We'll move forward. Okay, so there are various ways that you can end up assessing those two scenarios. So in pairs, you know, I want you guys to think about how you might probably come up with assessment strategies used in your school or classroom. Think about an activity that you did way back in high school. Let me first of all pause. Are you seniors, juniors, a mixture? A mixture, okay. So we have freshmen? Okay, so you guys just came from high school, huh? Good. So think about some of those assessment strategies and some of the tasks that you were given in high school. And then can we just talk, take 2 minutes, share a task and how that was assessed? Let's just take 2 minutes, just in groups and just discuss that and then share. In high school or whatever you're doing right now.
Dig into the archives.
The what?
Dig into the archives.
Oh, archives. Yeah, exactly. Way back. Say what now? Oh, do you guys need a sign-in sheet?
Yes, we do.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It gets signed into here. Who's got paper? Let's make a sign-in sheet.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I work with graduate students most of the time and I never think about.
Get some credit for
Okay, very good. I never think about signing up because. Okay, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, just make sure that you get your name down, okay? All right. So, any examples that you guys might want to share of how some activities that you did participate? Yes, sir?
So we built like a bridge in high school, and you were given a rubric based on the weight of the bridge, how much weight it held, the types of materials used to hold it together, and you were given a grade based on that.
So-
I'm a very big fan of rubrics. It puts everything out there, unlike some of the grading schemes here at Purdue, when you get a grade and out of nowhere.
So was that like the West Point bridge design competition? You know what I'm talking about? Or just a bridge? You did the West Point?
Yeah.
Oh, you did that?
Yeah, we followed the grading policies for it, but we did it within our class.
Ah, it's a simulation for bridge. So totally different.
No, we didn't have the West Point one. Ours
Okay.
was very open-ended.
Okay, so you sort of like, did you use like, is it popsicle sticks or?
I used the 2x10.
Oh, 2 by, wow,
Yeah.
wow, okay, interesting. And you had a rubric.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Any other ideas? What did the rubric contain, if I may ask?
So
Like,
it contained the weight of your bridge,
Weight.
weight it supported, construction, and then basically design finesse.
So it had some criteria put down. Okay, very good, very good. So what we're talking about right here now is making sure that you get some criteria when you're going to do what? Assess, right? We're talking about criteria, we're talking about objectives, what you want your kids to be able to attain at the end of the day. So let's look at some of the key things I want to talk about today. Levels, understanding levels of knowledge. Bloom's taxonomy. Somebody told me that they know about Bloom's taxonomy. What's Bloom's taxonomy? Oh, you know about Bloom's taxonomy?
It's just like the level, like there's varying levels of how students understand things. So like,
And you have to reach like a lower level before you can keep moving on.
Moving on, right? Very good. So we have lots, lower thinking skills, and then we have HOTS, high order thinking skills, right? So you move from the lower level thinking skills as you progress. So remember learning progressions as you progress to the higher, order thinking skills. Most of the time as teachers, we always want our kids to be up here, right? Higher order thinking skills whereby they can problem solve, think critically, do all those marvelous things that we want them to be able to do. However, before they get there, they have to start here. Low order thinking skills, which if you look here, we have two versions of Bloom's taxonomy. There is the original version from 1956 by Benjamin Bloom, and then there's the 2001 revised Bloom's taxonomy right here that starts with remembering. So if you look at knowledge, knowledge has been replaced by remembering, and knowledge is the lower level of thinking, whereby you have knowledge you can recall, you can list, you can list a couple of things. So for example, if I teach you how to change a tire, a flat tire, you should be able to list the steps. So you have the knowledge of changing a flat tire. As you progress, comprehension, understanding, and then application, you start going into higher order thinking skills, whereby if I teach you 5 times 5, I'm hoping that you can be able to apply the steps of 5 times 5, computing 5 times 5. If I give you a question about 8 times 5, you should be able to do the same thing. So you're applying, okay? And then analysis, you're able to break down things and think through, right? And then synthesis, you synthesize, analyze, synthesize, and think about different scenarios. What you guys do probably in EPICS, right? And then evaluation. You're able to evaluate different scenarios, okay? So think about design thinking. Do you think this correlates to design thinking in a sense? You guys know about design thinking? How many know about IDEO, the design school? You know about design thinking? They give out 4 stages, is it 5 stages of design thinking that they talk about? Do you see that correlating to that? How? I see you shaking your head. Okay, from, you have a need, so you sort of like have some knowledge about the customer, and then you empathize with them, you understand what's really going on, and then you sit down to probably design, prototype, and, and then develop and evaluate. So it kind of like goes through the same kind of stuff in a sense, but not exactly correlating. So these are the 5, levels of, actually the 6 of knowledge, and that's how people build knowledge, cognitive, so psychomotor, they look at knowledge from that perspective. So I have a couple of questions over there, that you might just think about. I know I might run out of time, because this runs up to 5:20, right? I have a couple of slides to go over. So this is just questions, reflection questions that you might think about. How do levels of progression and levels of knowledge at elementary or secondary inform assessment? Just think about those kind of things, when you talk about progression, especially if you think about standards, this is what a 3rd grader should be able to do. This is what a 5th grader should be able to do. Probably you guys have come across people saying, oh, they cannot read. They're reading at 2nd grade. Have you had those kind of statements? So why so? Why do people make those kind of statements? Does it mean that probably the assessment piece was lacking along the learning progression? Somebody never caught it? Somebody never diagnosed that the child was not reading at the appropriate level. I don't know. But those are some of the key things that you need to think about when we look at assessment, at elementary, middle, and also high school. Let me stop. Any questions, please? Wow. You guys, you want to tell me I'm really hitting the nail?
Doing great.
Oh, great. Let's move on. All right. So, writing measurable objectives. After you understand levels of knowledge, you need to be able to write measurable objectives. How many know about objectives? Okay, I'm going to now ask you, what are objectives? It's right there. You could probably go ahead and just read it.
Just something that you don't want me to read it.
No, you just tell me what you think.
It's kind of like the end goal that you want to accomplish. So they give you a statement, and that's what you want to.
Right. So most teachers actually do write objectives, right? They have an objective put down so that they can be able to attain that objective. So when you go to, like for example, today, I put down an objective. I was like, I'm going to come in here, and by the end of this lesson, I call this Armstrong 1103. Did I put over there? Upon completion of this lesson, Armstrong 1103 students will be able to identify the 4 parts of an objective and provided a variety of objectives to examine. That's just one. I might probably say at the end of this lesson, Armstrong 1103 students should be able to understand assessment. But understand is a very ambiguous word. Right? How do you measure understand? Can you be able to measure understand? So what do you do though? Remember we talked about levels of knowledge in the previous slide, and I had knowledge and then I had understand. However, if you think about the revised Bloom's taxonomy, they had comprehension, which did replace understand. So how do you measure understand? Anybody? I know you guys know. Yes?
You should change the verb that you're using.
Change the verb. So very good. So we have active verbs, right? We have active verbs. So if you go back to the levels of knowledge, Bloom's taxonomy, each level has some verbs. So for example, when I want you folks to be able to do something like show me, I might show me that you've understood this. I might probably ask you to explain or demonstrate, or list. So the certain active verbs or just apply. The certain active verbs, I might challenge you, if you have a computer, you can actually go on the internet and type in Bloom's taxonomy active verbs. And each level of Bloom's taxonomy, I should have probably printed that and shown you up here. Each level of Bloom's taxonomy will have active verbs, low order thinking skills, and high order thinking skills that educators and you folks might probably use to be able to attain the objective that you just mentioned. So if you look out here, we have, I teach education classes, and I work with student teachers who go out there and become teachers eventually. As a matter of fact, today I was out in Benton Central, supervising. So one of the key things I want to see is when I go into a classroom, I'll ask, so tell me how you prepared for this lesson. So tell me what goals, what are your objectives, and I use the ABCD. A simply means audience, B means behavior, C means condition, and D means degree, okay? Degree of attainment, okay? So if you look at A, upon completion of this lesson, that's the condition, upon completion of this lesson. So I'm hoping that by the end of this lesson, so that's a condition right there, all right? And then Armstrong 1103 students, that's the audience, so the students themselves. So upon the completion of this lesson, the students will be able to identify 4 parts of an objective, okay? So if you look at that, is the behavior when provided a variety of objectives to examine, and that's the degree, okay? So most of the time, I usually get to, I don't know, and if you talk to educators, they'll look at it differently. Personally, when people tell me 80%, I usually get to ask them 80%. What is 80%? You know, and sometimes when people curve exams, you know about carving exams and all that, you know, I'm like, it's not really a true reflection of what really happened in the classroom. So personally, all the classes that I teach here at Purdue, I don't do percent. I do points. It's either 4 out of 5 or 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, or because you sort of like missed a couple of things. You never really hit the key things I wanted you to hit. So it's not 80 over 90 or 80 over 100. Nah, yes, go ahead.
Wouldn't 9 out of 10 still be 90%?
Kinda, per se, if you do convert that, it's true per se, but how do you quantify 90%?
Well, if
You
the
know.
exam was out of 100 points, you missed 10 of those 100.
Kinda, go ahead.
Well, I would argue too, like if you say 90%, it could be 9 out of 10. Like if it goes like a 10-question quiz or like a 100-question test, like saying specific numbers gives you a more specific look at.
Yeah, kind of like, I go with what you're saying. It makes sense to me. Although again, as I said earlier on, different folks will argue differently with the 90%, but I usually go with points. You just missed something. Like, let me give you another example. I'm from Kenya, so I went to school through the British system. And when you get to do compute something like, let's say you're doing algebra, the 5 steps to arriving to an answer, right? So step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and then you have an answer. There's no way you're going to get 5, let's say if there are 5 points, there's no way you're going to get five steps. There's no way you're going to get 5 points if you missed a step. Does that make sense? So you end up getting 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 5 if you miss 2 steps. You know, so at the end of the day, when I'm talking to the teacher, show me where I went wrong, they will easily tell me, you missed here, this has 5 steps, and that's the reason you got 3 out of 5. Or that's the reason you got 5 out of 5. Does this make sense? So from a percentage point of view, you can convert that for the purposes of maybe explaining key things when it comes to state or standards or whatever. You know, when you're looking for money, accountability, all those kind of things. But that's the way I look at things. And other folks will look at it differently. I'm not saying my way is the right way. Yes?
Have you heard of a Simpson rule then, where like percentages can be kind of fooling the audience? Have you heard of it?
I haven't heard about the tool, but I know those percentages might be fooling the audience. Why do I say that? Let me give you another example. You guys know about GRE and GMAT scores? And do you know percentile ranks? I don't believe in those. Do you know why?
There's so many ways to fudge the numbers.
Exactly. You know, and it doesn't mean that if you are in the 90th percentile and the guy who is at the probably 85th percentile, let me give you a good example. So I look at students' stuff when they're trying to get into the graduate school, and you'll find a student that scored maybe they are ranked at the, let's say, 50th percentile. And if you look at the quantitative score, is maybe 140, for example. And then another student will be ranked at the, let's say, 30th percentile. But if you look at the quantitative score, is maybe 135. But if you look at the percentile difference, it's like, is it what? Did I say 40 or what? 30 and 40. So if you look at that percentile difference, it's really huge. However, if you look at the difference in the scores, 140 and 130, it's only 10 points, right? But there are like 20,000 people or whatever folks who did better than that person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you can fudge it just by decreasing the sample size.
Exactly.
Percentile over closer.
Exactly. And that's why personally I'm like, I'd rather do points. You know, but people will argue differently. And that probably goes back to what you're saying. I don't know. But that's the way I look at it. Any other thoughts from this side of the room? I want to run out of time. It's 4:54. Okay, let's move. I just had something here because I'm going to run out of time. This is something I wanted us to do. In pairs or small groups, write an objective, but I know we're going to run out of time. But again, that's just how to write objectives. How many have written objectives before? 1, 2. You guys took education classes or something?
We're education
Oh, okay, no wonder. Okay, great. Any other folks from education here? Only the two of you? Oh, okay. So it's really cool because sometimes when you have EPICS folks, engineering folks working with education folks, they really help when it comes to writing these kind of things. You know, very good, very good. All right, let's move forward. So then what is assessment? When we talk about assessment, so we've been talking about assessment. There's assessment, there's evaluation, there's, what is assessment then? Yes, sir.
You're seeing if the students meet the learning objective.
Very simple way of saying it. Yes, so you're assessing, right? So there are various ways of assessing, as a matter of fact, if the students did meet the learning objectives. So, for example, I might just walk into this class and have a right, test, and then do this intervention, and then walk out of class. By the time I'm walking out of class, you guys are doing like a post, right? So I'm actually doing an assessment just to see if you guys understood where you were at the beginning of the lesson and where you are at the end of the lesson. That's a form of assessment, right? Any other forms of assessment? Or rather, not forms, a definition of assessment that you know? You might share? Oh, okay. Okay, I'm going to just keep on moving then. So this assessment, it's, of course, an ongoing process. You know, you can just do, hey, come in here. Like you guys, are you guys doing your midterms right now? Or you have assessment? So it's ongoing, right? There's assessment for, as, and of. Assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and assessment of learning. Those are three things. So 3 ways for assessment. So if you look at assessment for learning, it's mostly formative in nature. And so teachers are, like what you just said, you want to know where you are with your teaching, okay? So for learning purposes and how you can be able to help your kids meet the goals and objectives of your teaching. And then assessment as learning, the students themselves get to reflect. You know, so you as a student, you know, which is really cool because when you're working on your projects, you want to reflect on those projects. There's something called reflective practice. You know, if you're not really reflecting on certain key things that you're learning, then my take is that, you know, learning is changing behavior. You know what I'm talking about? It's changing behavior because when you learn something, you are actually changing your behavior, right? And you have to reflect and be able to think about, okay, what's really happening? So as a student, you're sort of like learning and reflecting on that, and you're changing your behavior to meet probably, hopefully, positive, not really negative, because there's positive and negative, and you can extinguish positive, I mean, you can extinguish negative behavior, you know, various ways, and you can keep on assessing if that behavior is gone or not, right? So these are 3 ways of assessment. And then assessment of learning occurs when teachers use evidence of student learning to make judgments on student achievement against goals and standards, so mostly summative. So maybe things like ECS, you know, end of course assessments. You know about those? You guys have done it, right? Okay. And formative assessments, you know, things that you probably do in the classroom, like probably what you guys are doing right now if you're doing some midterms and all that, or weekly, after every 4 weeks you do an assessment. This is formative in a sense. So the teacher sort of like uses those to gauge where you are, or rather where they are in their teaching. You know, and you can utilize those as a teacher to change the direction of how things are going. Questions for me, please? Okay. This side of the room is really active. This side of the room is really quiet.
This is the party side.
Oh, really? Okay, I see. So this is a really long bullet that a slide with a lot of bullets that I put, not really bullets. You know, they told me to stop bullets because bullets are sort of like a killer. And so folks just go on the bullet, bam, you know, bullets kill. So I just put stuff on there, you know, so I don't do bullets anymore. I'm serious. A communication guy told me to stop using bullets. You know what I'm talking about, bullets?
Do you have like real bullets? Like the real...
No.
Like 9mm?
No. Bullet points, let me say that. so I stopped using bullet points. They were like, it looks more cleaner when you just have stuff over there and you're able to explain. Anyway, so assessment for learning kind of like talks about, you know, some of these key things. And one of the key things that I wanted to put out is right here, prior knowledge, perceptions and misconceptions. That's really important as a teacher to be able to capture misconceptions. You know, you have a diagnostic test or some kind of diagnosis to take place before you start teaching, so you can capture misconceptions. Because if you don't capture misconceptions, if you don't utilize assessment to capture misconceptions, guess what happens? Kids will not really comprehend what's going on. Do you guys know the story of fish is a fish?
Like Jesus, fishers of men?
No.
Yeah, it's the story of the second session.
Oh, somebody mentioned it about fish is a fish? Yeah, misconceptions. The story of fish here about this little frog, or it was a fish that went to land. And so people out there in the land, and then they went back to the water and started like describing what the land people were. And the other fish out there were kind of like, wow, you know, having people with a head that looks like a fish, everything was, you know, so they built everything around their own world, you know. So a fish is a fish, you know. You know, when people are working with, so this fish is back in the water. Oh, out there people walk with 2 legs. So this other little fish, think about a fish, about people as